Hi, you're listening to The Sociology Show, a podcast about absolutely anything to do with the wonderful world of sociology. Whether you're a teacher, a lecturer, a student, or just taking a passing interest, this podcast will look at a range of issues from social class, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, religion, crime, education, and anything else that sociology has to offer. My name is Matthew Wilkin, and in each episode I will speak to someone working in the field of sociology and let them explain all about their own interests, their research and their experiences. So put your earphones in, turn the volume up, and let's be sociology geeks together, eh? My guest for this episode was Dr. Lisa McKenzie. Lisa is a sociologist and research fellow at the London School of Economics, and I was delighted to be able to talk to Lisa on everything to do with her background, her upbringing, and the areas of social class. Lisa's probably best known for her book, Getting By, Estates, Class and Culture in Austerity Britain. Lisa was really passionate talking about anything to do with social class, and it was really interesting to find out about her own personal background, and that she actually felt that she was always a sociologist, and even though she joined the subject late, it was something that was always in her heart. And so, without further ado, let's go over to the interview. Hi, thanks very much for taking the time to talk to the podcast. Do you want to start by introducing yourself?
Yeah, my name is Lisa McKenzie. Doctor, I say doctor, I have to use that now. It's better than being a miss or a miss or whatever. So I'm Dr. Lisa McKenzie. I am a sociologist and I am a working class academic as well. So those two things are important to me, being a working class academic. So I always put that in my title of who I am.
Great. And in fact, if I could pick up on that, before you became an academic, what's your background, if you don't mind telling us about your upbringing, your early socialisation?
Yeah, really, it's interesting because as a sociologist now, I think a lot about what it takes to be a sociologist or did going to university, did that make me a sociologist? Or doing a master's in research methods or doing a PhD, did that make me a sociologist? And thinking about it now, as a sociologist, I would say that I was a sociologist, from a long time ago, looking out the window, being nosy about my community, wanting to find out what's going on, critically thinking about what's happening in the local community, whether that's about the ways that, the council is spending its money or, what my neighbours are up to with each other. I've always been a nosy Parker, to be honest. And I think most working class people who come from working class communities, I think we'd make fantastic sociologists.
Yeah. Because
one of the things that we have to do is that we always have to be aware of our circumstances. We always have to be aware of where we are and what's going on. It's a matter of safety for us. Who's in your community, who belongs there, who doesn't. And these are the questions that we ask ourselves every day. So I'd say I've always been a sociologist, or, I've always been a critical thinker, but being an academic, that's something else. I was brought up in a mining community called Sutton in Ashfield, and I lived in a council house right up until I left home at 19, actually. And then I went into another council house. So I've lived in council houses most of my life, council estates. I love council estates. I think they're amazing places, full of love and community, lots going on, lots of gossip, and I love gossip. But, I come from a mining community, grew up in the 1970s, which, it was quite tough, actually, the 1970s. There weren't a lot of money about, so I remember being, a little kid on a council estate, and my granddad was a miner, and at the time he was dying. He got emphysema. He got pit dust on his lungs. And I remember I lived with him, and he used to have a bed downstairs because he couldn't make it up the stairs. And we were really, really poor, I think.
Yeah.
didn't feel it at the time, but looking back, I think we were really, really poor. And I think that's something that's always stuck with me, really, is, that feeling of insecurity, because that's what poverty actually feels like. It feels like insecurity. So as much as I've got the love and the security of a family and a wider community, there was always a feeling of fear, I think, amongst, not just amongst my family, but a lot of families on the street. So I think that really shaped who I was and then what I became. What else happened to me? Well, grew up in the 80s. That was fun. The 80s was a brilliant era. If you don't know much about the 80s, find out. It was a great time. Sort of caught the end of the punk movement.
Yeah.
And then we went into sort of like a 1980s mod movement as well. And some brilliant bands came out of that, ska bands, the Specials. And that really started to shape me as well, but not just shape what I liked in music, but also started to shape my politics as well.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the music was really sort of political. And growing up in a mining community, and then in 1984, my dad went on strike in the 1984-85 miners' strike. The politics of being working class was everywhere. It was in the music that we listened to. It was in the dances that we danced. It was in the pubs that we went to. It was in our homes. The politics of the era was everywhere with us.
Yeah, fueled by Thatcher's government, I guess.
Yeah, and at the time Mrs. Thatcher was her government. We had a common enemy then. It seemed that we had a common enemy. A lot of people came together during that time, actually. And like I said, I come from a really small mining community, and during the strike, we got to meet people. People from London, people from Nottingham, even. We didn't really know sort of city dwellers. Some of those people I liked and really inspired me. Some of them, I couldn't believe them, actually. I met a load of people from Cambridge University. They used to come and sort of visit us. And I remember meeting them thinking, oh, my God, who are you? No, really. And I think, again, these were the points that started to shape my life and who I was. I left school, in 1984, I was leaving school anyway. Should have left in May. But my dad went on strike in March, and my mum just said to me, "There's no point going back to school now." So what I did before I could legally work is I worked in the strike centre in the soup kitchen. So I was working in the soup kitchen, sort of feeding the pickets, and then I started work at 16. I think it might have been end of May or beginning of June, and I started working in a factory making tights, and I stayed there 10 years.
Wow.
It's an unusual start
for
a sociologist. It's not an unusual start for a sociologist. I think it's the best start for a sociologist.
Yeah. So did you leave school with any qualifications at all then?
I think I got 2, because I remember when I worked in the factory, they let me have 2 afternoons off to go and do my O-levels. Yeah. So I did English and history. So I think I'd got an O-level in English and history.
Okay.
But to be honest, they weren't important to me at all. I was going to work, and I only went, and obviously, I could have had time off work. I mean, weren't things different then? That you could ask for time off work to do your O-levels, and you weren't paid. You didn't get paid. You lost money. So I did. And because I was going to lose money, and because my dad was on strike, I chose 2 exams to sit, and that was the 2 things that I liked best, which was English and history. And I didn't go and sit any of the others. I didn't take any others, but I did. And I thought, and thinking back now, that was quite a thing, really, that a 16-year-old girl who working in a factory would take those 2 afternoons off to go and do her exams. Yeah.
10 years in the factory. When did you go back into education? When did you do further or higher education?
Even longer after that. So and I'll tell you what, I mean, the reason I left the factory really was because I had a baby when I was 19. And when he got to 5 and he went to school, I needed to work different hours. So I left the factory and I went to work in a shop in retail. And then I went back. I went to educate. I mean, people say, when did you go back to education? But I think, I just went to education because, the education that I'd got at school, I wouldn't say that it was an education. It was schooling, but, very little of it was an actual education. To be honest, I was bored shitless at school. And hence that's why I never went. I just didn't go. I thought I didn't see the point. Even at sort of 14, I was questioning why I was there and was there something better I could do with my time. When I went to college, I was, how old would I have been? 30.
Yeah.
Yeah, it must have been 29, 30 actually. But the reason I went back is because, went in the first place, is because my mum had died. And I think when you have such something like that happen in your life, it's so life-changing that you do start to really reassess, who you are and what you're doing. I mean, at that point, my son was about 10 years old. And I just thought, you know what, is this all I'm good for? Folding T-shirts for an American T-shirt company, And when my mum died, I thought I want to do something else. So I went to see this sort of they used to have them on the high street then. There was Connection. It was called Connections. They were almost like, you could go and get advice on education and training, even adults. I don't think they even exist anymore. So I went into this Connections place, spoke to somebody, said what I was interested in. At the time, I thought I wanted to be a social worker. And the reason I said that is because, where I came from on my estate that I lived on, the only women I knew who'd been to university had been and done a social work degree. So I thought, I want to do that because I thought that's what I'd be able to do. And I knew what it was. I'd heard of a social worker. And also I knew that if I got trained as a social worker, I'd be trained at something. I'd be able to do something. And that's really important when you're working class because doing education for education's sake just seems too frivolous. Yeah. So what I thought is social work, I'll be trained, I'll be able to get a job. It's not frivolous. And then I went on an access course, access to social work actually, at Nottingham College, and I did access to social work. And while I was there, I realised that actually I didn't want to do the social work bit. What I really loved was the general learning. So I totally changed my mind. The only university in Nottingham at the time, I mean, again, you've got to, it wouldn't even have crossed my mind to go to a university that I couldn't get to on the bus. With a 10-year-old and as a 30-year-old woman, I wouldn't have even, I had two choices, Nottingham Trent University, that did the social work degree, or the University of Nottingham, which did the sociology degree. So I ended up at the University of Nottingham, a Russell Group university, doing the sociology degree, but having no clue what it was about. Yeah. Even though it was only 2 miles away from where I lived, or 3, I'd never been to that university before. Yeah. So that was a shock.
Yeah. So when you started sociology, what really inspired you? Is there a particular writer or a theorist or a perspective? I imagine Marxism was key, but was there any other particular writers or theorists that really inspired you?
It wasn't really.
Oh, okay, right.
No, Marxism. I'll tell you what. Why? Well, the reason I changed my mind in the first place, when I was at on the access course, I had. Again, I don't even think universities care that much to do this anymore. Somebody from the university came to do a talk on doing sociology at the University of Nottingham. And the person that came started to talk to us. And remember, on an access course, it was all adults, mostly women. And the person who came from the university started to talk about this book called Poverty, the Forgotten Englishman. And he said this book was written by some people that were at the University of Nottingham, and the study is about Nottingham. It's about a place called St Anne's. Well, I lived in St Anne's because when I'd left the mining community, I went into St Anne's in Nottingham, which was a sort of inner city council estate. And when I heard that there had been a book written about St Anne's, I couldn't believe it. I thought, I didn't know that people wrote books, or people at universities wrote books about places where I'd lived.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe that you could do that. And I didn't think that you could go to university to study places like St Anne's where I lived. So I got the book, and there's also a film that they made called Poverty in St Anne's. You can get it on YouTube. It's fantastic. And basically, it's a study that looked at specific poverty in communities. And it was written in the 1960s. And when I watched that and when I read that book, I thought, God, I want to do this. This is it. This is what I want to do. I want to write a book about my community where I live, but I want to write it in my voice.
Yeah.
And so actually it was that book that really did influence me. And then when I got to university, I did like Marx, but, I was not overwhelmed by Marx, like perhaps a lot of students first are. It's like, oh, the revolution.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you who really, really inspired me and still does is Pierre Bourdieu.
Yeah.
A French sociologist. And his work is kind of post-Marxism or, post-structuralism. And his work still inspires me now. I mean, I still read it and, learn stuff all the time, even reading the same work over and over again.
It's so amazing. Sorry, I was going to say it's amazing how many people mention that. I spoke to Louise Archer last week. She said the same.
Yeah.
Bourdieu comes up time and time again.
Yeah, and I think the reason why Bourdieu, and I've thought about this a lot actually in the years, I think it's because his theories offer us tools to understand social class. Because, up until sort of, the sort of, and Marx fails, not fails, but Marx, is a typical sort of, he explains the economic theory, and that's fine, to do that. But, poorer you are means that you're in a particular class. But what Bourdieu does is he talks about the economic, but he also talks about the cultural. And when it comes to inequality, the cultural is as important as the economic. And that's why I think a lot of us, women and particularly working class people and particularly working class women really are inspired by the work of Bourdieu because he helps us understand the cultural, social, economic and symbolic restraints on our personhood.
Yeah, I think something for me makes us realise how multifaceted social class actually is. Something I wanted to ask you is such a difficult question, but how do you define class beyond wealth?
Difficult. It's a difficult question. I mean, and not one that I think anybody can answer because it constantly changes. But I sort of follow the work of Pierre Bourdieu really, that class, number one, is about power. Yeah. And it's about power relationships with each other. So it's never about, a single unit or a single group, because it's always about the power relationships with other groups. So it's, for me, it's the working class relationship to power with the middle class and with all other classes, because you can only explain it through that relationship. I also like Bourdieu's explanation of the capitals: social capital, economic, cultural and symbolic, and I use that a lot as well. So I try and explain it to my students, and I'll say, if you've got a lot of economic capital, which is wealth, you can do things like put your kids into private school. And then they're going to get lots of cultural capital, which is education. And they're also going to meet other people that are like them, that they can socially network with. And then, they can go to the best universities, and then that gives them symbolic capital as well. So what I try and explain is, if you've got none of any of it, you can't trade it. Yeah. If you've got lots of it to start with, you can trade it and get more.
Yeah, but it becomes quite complex, doesn't it? But I mean,
yes,
trying to explain to some of my students. Let's take like a footballer like Wayne Rooney, growing up in Croxteth in a poor area of Liverpool. Many students would now assume that he's upper class because he's a millionaire.
Yeah,
but it's really difficult to explain. But his behaviours and who he mixes with, his pastimes and so on, he'd probably still consider himself a working class boy.
Yeah, and you know what? I probably would consider himself as working class as well, actually. Yeah. And it's not so much behaviours. It is complicated. I think, obviously someone like Wayne Rooney, I've always had this argument about footballers, because some footballers like Beckham, for example, they use their economic capital well.
Yeah.
They used it, they got involved in charities, and now they're in the upper echelons of the elite in every single way, and they've used charities. Again, charities are massive symbolic. People use them symbolically, and I think the Beckhams have used their economic capital to buy into the elite, and they've done that with, they mix with the right people. They mix with royalty.
Yeah.
And Elton John, who apparently is some sort of catalyst for high social capital. And so if you think about somebody like Wayne Rooney or John Terry and then David Beckham, which all came from similar backgrounds. But then if you think about the way that the press might report on any of them, and it does, it is very different. Wayne Rooney is often referred to as a gorilla.
Yeah.
And again, I've written a lot and talked a lot about the way that working class people, and actually not just working class people, black people as well, they did the same thing to Irish people, is sort of do the animalistic connection. And that's what people do. The sort of lower class you are, more connected you are to a uncouth, animalistic culture.
Yeah.
And that still stands.
And so the reason I asked that question is, how do you consider yourself, Lisa? Because obviously you're a working class girl from working class background, but many people would look at you now and say, well, you're middle class because you're a doctor, you've got an education. But I imagine you still consider yourself as a working class person, right?
Yeah, I'm working class.
Yeah.
And, and they would be wrong to think that I'm not working class.
Yeah.
Because my argument is when you say, if you've got a degree, that means that you can't be working class anymore. Or if you've got a PhD, that means you can't be working class anymore. Fundamentally, what you're saying is that working class people can't read and write.
Yeah.
They can't read books, because obviously if the way to transcend class is through education, you're making not an assumption, but you're actually factually asserting that working class people cannot be educated. So therefore, you were born in the wrong class. So for me, that's why I'm a working class academic.
Yeah.
Because I'm working class and I can read Pierre Bourdieu.
Yes.
Being working class does not mean, I read The Sun or watch Britain's Got Talent.
Yeah.
I don't do any of them things. And I do read Bourdieu. I also watch Coronation Street.
Yeah.
I read Bourdieu. I watch Coronation Street. I think we're all complicated.
We're
all complicated as a self. But if you think about wider power structures and my relationship to power, that's where I would say that I'm still working class.
Yeah. So that's obviously led you into your own research. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about some of your main studies that you've conducted? Probably Getting By is probably the best known of your work. Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, I've done it. It's incredible, really. I look back, and I've only been an academic really for a short period of time. I mean, I did my PhD I got it in 2010. So it's only 10 years, really, that I've actually been an official academic since I got my PhD. But I have done an incredible amount of work. I'm not sort of blowing my own trumpet. I'm just thinking about, what I've actually done. Obviously, Getting By, which is a book, but it came from the research that I did doing my PhD. And I wrote a PhD, and it's interesting, really, because almost 10 years from the day that I sort of sat in the college doing the Access course, where I thought, do you know what, I'd like to write a book about my community. Almost 10 years to the day, I handed my PhD in, which was exactly that. It was about my community. So, and then what came out of the PhD was the book Getting By. So the PhD's got all the... You see, I think academics write really badly. They think they write really brilliantly. I think they write awfully. Sociologists especially.
Yeah.
Bourdieu writes terrible. His writing's terrible. There's a lot of complicated language in there.
Yeah.
So I had to write this PhD with all this complicated language and sort of ways of sourcing and resourcing and referencing, and it was very difficult for me to do that, because it's a hard job writing about your community that you love, that you have real emotions for, and then stripping out all of that emotion to make it into a PhD. So when I handed the PhD in, I knew I wasn't happy with it, because I'd stripped too much of the emotion out of it in order for it to be a academic piece of work.
Yeah.
So I was always going to do the book. So Getting By really was the work of my PhD, and then I did some more research for 2 years, which was about the men in the same community. So my PhD was about mothers in St Anne's, and then I got some research funding to do the men in St Anne's as well. So the Getting By book is both of those things. It's the PhD and the research that followed. And I was able to add the emotion into that. And that book is really about life on a council estate, family life, everyday life, really. There's nothing startling happens. It's just about everyday life. And what I try and do with that is bust a few myths, and explain a few stereotypes. And I think I do some of that really well. And obviously, because we're talking about class inequality now, they change and it never ends. So the research that I do around class inequality, I can't ever see it ending.
Yeah.
I did some research in London, in Bethnal Green, and again, that was with mainly working class women. That was about gentrification, and about class cleansing, working class people living in London who simply can't afford to live there anymore and almost being forced out. That book should have been finished ages ago. This lockdown period, it's going to be finished.
Yeah.
But that's going to be called Grieving for London, Class Cleansing. So that's, I'm looking forward to that coming out, actually, because that's another spin on working class life.
Yeah.
Again, the power dynamics. And there's a lot about the power dynamics between community and politicians in that one.
Is that the one that you also discussed about Grenfell as well?
Yes. The last chapter in that book will be about Grenfell Tower, because obviously that is the culmination of what happens when people are not valued at all, devalued over a long process. because the people who lived in Grenfell Tower was devalued, and that takes time to do that, and it takes effort. And politicians and councils and people who live in places do that process. And I was really upset and angry around Grenfell, because I know that a process of devaluing and demeaning a community takes a long time, and it takes a lot of effort. And all of that time and effort was definitely put in by local and national politicians on working class people, on council estates, on tower blocks, on working class people who are migrants, working class people of colour. That demonisation takes a long time, and councils, officials and politicians have done that work. And then obviously when Grenfell Tower burnt down, those same politicians were giving empty words when actually, they had been part of the cause. So, Grenfell Tower, that's the last chapter in the book.
Yeah.
And really important, actually, to the story of working class people.
And I know you've also talked extensively about voting habits as well. Dare we broach the subject of Brexit? Because something a lot of people are interested in at my level, and students as well. Traditionally the working classes voted Labour, but we have seen a little bit of a turning of the tide, and also quite surprising the number of working class people that did vote Brexit as well. What's your kind of thinking behind that?
Do you know what? I've got to say, I had a good Brexit.
Yeah.
Because, and again, I'm a sociologist that's really interested in people.
Yeah.
And so at the time that Brexit was happening, so just before the election, the referendum, I was doing research with the women in Bethnal Green in East London. And I've been an ethnography, the type of work that I do, takes a long time, and it takes a lot of effort. So I've been meeting up with this particular group of women. I think there's about 6 of them. And I was meeting up with them every week or every 2 weeks over a 3-year period. So that's a lot of meeting up, and that's a lot of talking. And we used to talk about, and obviously I was doing research around housing and gentrification, but obviously when you start meeting people, you talk about all sorts of things. You talk about family life. I don't just sit there and ask, I don't write the questions and then, and ask people to answer them. Ethnography and the type of work I do is, it comes out of the conversations that those women wanted to talk about. So each week they talk about lots of different things. David Beckham, sometimes we talk about. We talk about. In fact, we talked a lot about David Beckham during the Brexit debate. But they would talk about things that were important to them. And from 2014, which is when I started meeting them, there'd been several sort of elections, local elections, national elections. And I'd always tried and talked to them about politics. And I'd say, are you going to vote? And they was absolutely not interested ever. He used to say to me, you know what, that's boring, it's not for us, I'm not interested, they're all the same, they don't care about us. And the conversations used to end pretty sharply. I could never get them to talk about official politics. Yeah. Although if I talked to them about, the state of the streets, how messy they were, or if I talked to them about school choices and school places, then they'd immediately talk about all of that stuff, which is political. Yeah. But they just wasn't interested in the institutional politics, which is elections. And this all changed really in 2016, last 2 weeks before the referendum. And they started talking to me about the referendum. And I was really surprised, because I'd assumed, and for the months leading up, they had not been interested at all about it. The last 2 weeks, they started to become interested. And they wanted to vote with me. They wanted to vote out. And I remember, so I took the opportunity to talk to them about it, and I was like, well, why do you want to leave? And basically, what they wanted is they wanted change.
Yeah.
They just wanted any change, anything, because you've got to remember where we were then, and that's why the next book I write's got to be, well, it'll be because you've got to contextualise things. Where they were at that time, it was 2016. We'd had this rotten Conservative government in. Cameron and Osborne was every bit as rotten and evil as Mrs. Thatcher. The austerity cuts that they had forced on communities was absolutely cruel. It was cruelty in its most barest. And, and I'd seen this happening to people in my community and family. And they wanted change. They could not go on as it was. And this Brexit thing had come up, and it seemed a way for somebody to listen, for somebody to hear. And so that's what they did. So when we came to the vote, what they did is they read that ballot paper as, do you want things to be the same or do you want things to be different?
Yeah, that makes sense, yeah. And
they said, we want things to be different. Consequences of that has been sort of 4 years of just awful class prejudice. Absolute awful class prejudice. All the ills of society have been laid at the door of working class people by the middle class. And this is why the relationship between middle class and working class people is really important. Because, xenophobia, racism, stupidity, lack of intelligence, lack of knowledge, all of these things have been laid at the working class's door partly because of Brexit. When actually what has happened is none of the people that are laying these sort of cruel narratives at working class people's doors, not any of them could understand or imagine what it would be like to live as a young mother who doesn't eat every day because it's the only way she can feed her kids.
Yeah. So you empathised with their decision, even if you didn't agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I don't vote. Yeah. I didn't vote for the EU referendum, and I don't vote in politics. I think they did the right thing. I didn't empathise with them. I think they did the right thing.
Yeah.
I don't empathise with them. Do I care? I don't really care. I don't care much about the EU or whether we're in it or when we're out of it. I don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. And if people are being completely honest, neither today.
No one knows at the moment. That's
no.
True. Yeah.
So all this sort of posturing is bullshit.
Yeah.
But what I do understand is I understand what it's like to be somebody that nobody ever listens to. And that your opinion means nothing because you're too stupid or you're uneducated or you don't matter. Or, somebody else knows what's best for you.
Yeah.
And actually part of poverty is also the poverty of, I suppose, having any kind of voice. You can live on benefits, you can have, you can, not be living in poverty. But if you've never got a choice or a say in anything that happens in your life or in your community, that makes you poor. It makes you poor in autonomy, it makes you poor in hope, it makes you poor in, lots and lots of different ways. So if working class people decided to vote to leave the EU, not because they wanted to leave the EU or they cared much about the EU, but because they wanted to let the country know that they were there, I absolutely support that. I think it was the right thing.
Yeah, it comes back to what you said about voice, power, status, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, imagine if they'd stayed at home. So what we've got to do here as well is say that all working class people didn't vote Brexit, and actually Brexit was, it was a project done by a particular party politics. It was a particular part of the Conservative government party. You know, it was basically Conservatives arguing amongst themselves about something, and it spilled out. Which is why another reason why I didn't vote in it is because I didn't think, you know, I'm not getting involved in Conservative Party politics.
Yeah.
But it spilled out and it spun out. And I think, you know, behind Brexit, there's lots and lots of different sort of agendas behind Brexit. Some are left-wing agendas. And similarly, you know, the far right and the neo and the right wing, like Nigel Farage, is also behind Brexit for completely different reasons. So it's not that I take a stand on any of it. It's just that the political landscape of where we were in 2016, and actually probably where we still are now, is that some people have no say whatsoever.
Yeah, that's really powerful stuff, Lisa. Thank you for that answer. Before I leave you, I just wanted you to tell us where we can read more about your work, or have you got a blog? You've got Twitter. I know you're quite active on that as well.
Well, currently I'm writing for Russia Today, RT. You know, people are very. I mean, no matter what I do, people are, you know, complain about everything. But Russia Today is publishing a lot of articles. I'm writing articles about this crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, for Russia Today. I get a lot of stick for writing for Russia Today, you know, because it is funded by Putin. But equally, you know, BBC has got an agenda, Sky has got an agenda. As an anarchist, as a working class anarchist, as a working class academic, as a working class sociologist, I want my words to be part of the bigger argument. And if you're not in it, you can't be heard.
Yeah.
And if that's one thing that all of this has taught me, from being a little girl to being, you know, an academic, is if you're not in it, you can't argue.
Yeah.
So you've got to be in it. So where can you find my words? Doing a lot of writing for Russia Today at the moment. I wrote for the LSE blog. I'm just writing another blog for them about COVID-19. I seem to be good in a crisis, me. And obviously the book that is coming out.
Yes.
The new book that is coming out. So yeah, so you know, I think if you Google me, I come up quite a lot.
Yeah. And
you know, not. Pardon?
Sorry, I was going to say I can tweet out your Twitter handle as well, because I know you're quite active on that. People might be interested to follow you on there.
Yeah. If they want to watch, I'm going to put a warning on my Twitter. You know what? It's not for the faint-hearted.
No, that's good. Dr. Lisa McKenzie, thank you so much for giving up your time today, and I look forward to reading the new book soon.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye now. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast. If you would like to contact the show or be interviewed, then please email the sociologyshowpodcast@gmail.com.